Toastmasters to improve his impromptu speaking skills with a Z. Today he'll be giving his 5th Toastmasters speech, Your Body Speaks. They're all doing speech number 5. From the Competent Communicator Manual, his 5 to 7 minute speech is titled, not Modern Warfare, but Expect to be Surprised. Please help me in joining Mr. Martin Gawecki.
So that was a terrible idea to follow David speaking, but we'll see what we can do. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, honored guests. In case you didn't know, or you haven't met me before, I am a gigantic nerd. And I'm going to demonstrate that today. Have you ever seen the movie, or have you ever read the book Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone? Anyone raise your hands? Awesome. One of my favorite scenes in that movie, well, maybe not favorite, but one of the more interesting scenes in that movie is at the very beginning when Harry Potter gets his first letter to go to Hogwarts. And he's living with his aunt and uncle who are totally against him going to a magic school. And so they take the letter away from him before he can read it. The next day, he gets 2 letters. After that, he gets 3. After that, he gets 5. After that, he gets more and more letters to the point where finally the doors and the windows burst open and this flood of letters streams in. And there are just too many letters for his aunt and uncle to pick up to prevent him from reading. And he's on his journey to become one of the greatest wizards in the world. Now, this is a great analogy for something that I'm going to be talking about today, which is a sin flood. Not sin with an N or with an I, but sin with a Y. And a sin flood is an example of a denial of service attack, which is kind of ties into travel, I guess. But I want to talk about this idea of the modern warfare that we're going into, and the concept that you should expect to be surprised at every turn of this battle that has started raging and that will continue to rage throughout our lives. So, early denial of service attacks were very simple. The way that the internet works, the way that communications work, you would have this thing called a TCP handshake, which is a way of establishing a connection between 2 computers. And so basically, if you're calling another computer, you're contacting another computer, you would send a SYN, a synchronization. The other computer would send a SYN-ACK saying, yep, I'm here, we can talk. And then you would send a final acknowledgement and say, all right, connection established, now we can exchange information. The way that this was used as an attack is that it turned out that most computers, when they got that SYN, would say, all right, I'm getting ready to talk to this other computer, I need to set up some resource. I'll put aside some memory, I'll put aside some processing time, I'll start waiting for all this stuff that might happen. And it turned out that it was really easy to just send a SYN, send another SYN, send another SYN, and the computer would just start putting away resources waiting for this connection to get established. And that would never happen. Your server would get overloaded, and then the users would never be able to actually use that resource because it was just taken up by all these fake messages. So that was sort of one of the first salvos that was fired in this war of denial of service versus the actual use of the users. So how do you defend against this kind of very simple attack? One of the basic ways was to set up a firewall on your computer. It turned out that in the early days of the internet, your computer would just kind of listen and accept every connection that you would possibly send to it. So no matter what port, no matter what kind of message it would just say, hey, I'm open for business, I want to talk to the internet. Just like you would on the original phone lines, you were excited to get any kind of call from anyone, and then you realize telemarketers were just ruining it for you. The next sort of step away from the computer that you could do this is with a router, so that would do a little bit more of like a filtering firewall type thing. But pretty soon, hackers and kind of not malnutritious, but evil doers would get around that. And the way that they would do that is they would do this SYN flood thing. And it turned out that despite the fact that you could filter out what kind of messages would get in and not have to set up all these resources anytime you would get a SYN packet, you could sort of determine, okay, these are fake SYNs, I don't have to respond to them or put aside resources for them yet. If you just send enough of them, you end up clogging the proverbial pipes. And so that's what the Harry Potter analogy was. And so people would have these internet connections that were much bigger, like 5 megabytes or 10 megabytes, and would just hammer people with dial-up, 10, 20 years ago, because you were just sending so many messages, this stream of messages, that it didn't matter that your computer wasn't responding to them. It was still getting pinged by them all the time, and all the other stuff just got lost in the noise. And so ISPs stepped in and said, all right, we're going to have to not leave it up to the users and have them figure out how to set up the routers and all their computers. ISPs are going to have to start blacklists and lists of people of, okay, these are guys that are just sending us crap and we're just not even going to forward it through. We're going to try to manage this entire thing. And of course, the hackers responded with some additional creativity. They came up with this idea of botnets. Let's not only send a full pipe from one computer, let's take over 1,000 computers, 1,000,000 computers. And now it doesn't matter if their pipes are big or small. We're sending information through so many different channels that we're just going to flood and take down even websites like Amazon or Microsoft or Google. But of course, the good guys responded by saying, all right, how can we figure this out? And the current technology is basically you buy a bigger pipe. So there are computer companies that actually provide the service of, if you're getting hit by a denial of service attack, we'll provide you additional bandwidth so big, the pipe is just so huge that you're on the internet no matter how many packets they send it. So there's constant back and forth, and it's continuing on. There's new technologies of doing amplification and rebound attacks that just make this whole thing really interesting. And this ties into exactly what the topic of my speech is to expect to be surprised. Because just when you think that nothing else could possibly defend against this, or just when you think that this defense is so good then there's no way to break through, someone's going to figure it out. So the first time I went to go see Harry Potter, it was my sister's birthday. And I really didn't want to go see it. I mean, she was this little kid, this movie sounded really boring. I was not interested in this at all. It was going to be predictable. Come on, it's a movie about magic and wizards. What could possibly be interesting in it? And I was surprised. I was surprised, and it is now one of my favorite and most highly recommended movies and series. It is a genius septological masterpiece, which is a trilogy with 7 books. That's how many it has. Okay. And I continue to be surprised by things like that in my life. So modern warfare is being waged on a battlefield of our own making. The internet is something we came up with, unlike nature, which is unpredictable, not very well understood. It's something we've built, we've defined, we know how it works. And yet, there are still people finding creative ways to attack and defend against these types of things. So if you take one thing away from my speech today, expect to be surprised. Madam, Mr. Toastmaster.